Good morning, world. Today we'll be discussing the Black Lives Matter movement and why it's so important now more than ever for the Black community to stay strong, know our rights, and to fight for justice. My name is Aeisha Dixon, and I am delighted to be your host. Today, our guest will be Melvin Medina. Melvin is the Advocacy and Outreach Director for the American Civil Liberties Union. Tell us about yourself and your organization.
Well, I'm very happy to be here, Aeisha, so thank you for inviting me.
Of course.
I was born and raised in Waterbury, Connecticut, the Brass City, and I work at the ACLU. And the ACLU is an organization that we basically function as our nation's guardian of liberty. We've been doing it for about 100 years, and our role is to protect our rights that are guaranteed in the Constitution. And that includes everything from ending mass incarceration, protecting free speech, working to ensure that our reproductive rights for women are protected. And we do that work through the legislature, both in the federal legislature and state legislature. We do that work in our courts, federal and state courts. And we do that in working in the community. My role at the ACLU of Connecticut as Advocacy and Outreach Director is to ensure that the work we do is informed by the communities we aim to protect. So I do that in two different ways. The first is directly engaging the community through listening sessions, community discussions, and direct organizing. And the aim of that work is to activate people to get involved civically in their government. So the second portion of what I do is train people on how to lobby for their own issues, get people activated and motivated to directly engage their political representatives.
That's super cool. So there are many cases in the past decade, some old and some recent, where justice should have been served but was not. Some are related to police brutality, and others are not. To specify, I'll name a few, including Kendrick Johnson, Sandra Bland, and Eric Gardner. According to the Huffington Post, Kendrick Johnson was a high school student whose body was discovered inside of a rolled-up wrestling mat in the gym at Lowndes High School. A preliminary investigation and autopsy concluded that the death was accidental. However, a private pathologist conducted a second autopsy, which concluded that Johnson died from blunt force trauma. Besides that, his body was stuffed with newspaper by the people at the funeral home, and his organs were missing, and the cameras at the school were missing footage. So I can only imagine how frustrating this is, for something like that to happen to your own child, especially when you can't prove it. So why do you think that this case caused so much havoc, and what do you think should have been done differently to solve this case?
It's a really good question and a really tough issue. I think what's at root in that example is, and rightfully so, a distrust in institutions. There is a long history in the United States where institutions that are intended to protect us, when it comes to Black Americans, simply have not protected them. And in fact, there has been a substantial amount of abuse. So I think one of the reasons it became such a national issue is because all of that built-in history that already existed.
Right, I definitely agree with you there. Another incident was that with Eric Gardner. According to a video that was recorded at the time of his death, a police officer was harassing him about selling cigarettes, and he told the police officer he was tired of being harassed and he wasn't, selling anything. However, that led to the chokehold the police officer administered, which caused Eric Gardner's his death. Let's roll the clip of that footage.
Sat down, holding myself, my stomach, he told me to do.
I got you, don't worry, because he was just sitting here. I just came here. He was just sitting here.
Mind my business. I'm fight breaker, I stop.
Yes.
You don't say you can run up on me.
That's all right.
The people that's fighting just don't walk away? Are you serious? I didn't do nothing. What did I do?
Then before
I
that.
have my ID on me. Take you left for what? I didn't sell anything. I did nothing. We sitting here the whole time, minding our business. What are you talking about? Who wants you to do what? Who does sell cigarette to? To who?
Not that retro. There's another guy in the retro.
Easy way or hard way for what? Every time you see me, you want to mess with me. I'm tired of it. It stops today.
This guy right here is forcibly trying to lock somebody up for breaking up a fight.
Everybody standing here, they told you I didn't do nothing. I did not sell nothing. Because every time you see me, you want to harass me, you want to stop me, trying to sell a cigarette. I'm minding my business, officer. I'm minding my business. Please just leave me alone. I told you the last time. Please just leave me alone. Please, don't touch me. Don't touch me.
Hold on.
Don't touch me, please.
The girl came over,
not touch me.
gave us a
Damn, man.
Stop. Give your hand, buddy.
Put your hand behind your back. I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
All right. After watching that, do you feel the situation should have been handled differently?
Yeah, you know, I've seen that video multiple times, and each time I watch it, it's like I'm watching it for the first time, and it's as disturbing as the first time I've watched it.
Absolutely.
You know, the simple answer to your question is NYPD policy clearly states that chokeholds should not be used. So it was actually the wrong procedure to be using.
Right.
What I think is even most troubling is that despite all of the work that we've done over the last decades to reform police and or law enforcement practices, as a black man in the United States, despite your best efforts to not be threatening and despite your best efforts to avoid confrontation, it still seems that dying at the hands of the police is something that is still happening. And that is something that's disheartening for movement builders. And it's really taken everyone to go back to the drawing board and figure out what's going on here that needs to change. And there are a couple of issues in the Eric Gardner case that I think provide a pathway to change. One of those is that the law enforcement officer actually was never disciplined. He was never laid off. He kept his job. And the family received $5.9 million through a civil lawsuit, but a criminal lawsuit did not go through.
Right.
And no amount of money can replace a life, clearly. What I've learned from that event is that we need two things. The first is we need independent investigations done when we have cases like these. So that includes taking the investigatory practice out of the hands of prosecutors and into an independent third party that's not associated with either law enforcement or the criminal justice system. And the second piece is an oversight board. In the same way that a doctor, when he performs a surgery and it goes wrong and he can be sued for malpractice, there's an oversight board that can step in and take the license away from that doctor to practice ever again. We don't have that for law enforcement. So even if the officer that choked Eric Gardner had lost his job, he can go to another jurisdiction and just become a law enforcement officer again. So we clearly need to license the act of being a police and have a mechanism in place to revoke that license.
I definitely agree with that. I do. So another case of many was the Sandra Bland case. According to the New York Times, Sandra was found dead in her jail cell and her death was classified as a suicide. Once again, footage was missing from inside of the jail. A lot of information did not add up. Even her mugshot appeared to be edited, in which it seems she could have already been dead when the photo was taken. So now a woman is dead and nobody seems to know what happens. Even her family and those who knew her well refused to believe that, she killed herself. Do you believe that there's more to the story? And how do you think cases with so much mystery and loose ends should be handled?
I mean, I think it speaks to a distrust of institutions again, how I mentioned before. I think it's important to take a step back on the Sandra Bland case because the initial traffic stop is really important because it's illustrative of kind of what goes wrong in situations when police aren't trained and they don't learn to de-escalate. So Sandra Bland was originally stopped for not using a turn signal when she was turning. When you watch the video, what's really disheartening to see is a law enforcement officer intentionally looking to agitate and instigate an emotional reaction from Sandra. And the whole reasoning of the officer pulling her out of her car was because she didn't put out a cigarette. And what is, I guess, bizarre, if you really think about it, is there was nothing illegal about her smoking in her car.
Right.
She was old enough to smoke.
That was the first thing that I learned after watching the video, is that there's nothing wrong with smoking in your car.
Right. And not only did he pull her out of the car, he pointed a taser at her face,
right,
threatening her. I think, first of all, that officer is a paid professional, and he should be trained in to engage in de-escalation methods, and he clearly did not.
Right.
I think the other piece that's really important in the Sandra Bland case is, from a know your rights perspective, it's frustrating because she did nothing wrong up until the point of the interaction where she's being pulled out of her vehicle. And if we live in a country where exercising your rights can mean your death, then there's something clearly wrong in the current system. And it goes back to, we need to take a step back and figure out what mechanisms are in place to fix this situation. And I think it goes back to that oversight board where you revoke licenses from law enforcement and prevent them from being able to continue their job. In the Sandra Bland case, that officer was ultimately laid off, but Texas law doesn't prevent him from becoming an officer in another city. And lastly, there needs to be an internal oversight board that is, taking the investigations in these cases, whether, trying to figure out what happened in the jail cell or during the stop, that needs to be taken out of the current kind of investigatory mechanism and put into an independent third party.
I definitely agree with you there. All right, well, that concludes today's show. I want to thank all of you for tuning in to listen to about our unjust situations that happen to the African Americans in this nation. In order to make change, we first have to admit that there is a problem. Black lives do matter, and it's time to know our rights and to stand up as one people. Thank you to Melvin so much for coming out today to speak with us.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Until next time, thank you for watching.